be delayed.
Hello, Dad. I actually asked if we could take out one of the old Chinooks. They said no. The flight's in 2 days, but I don't think they're going to change their mind.
On June the 1st, 1994, pilots at Boscombe Down suspend all further test flights.
Okay, yeah.
Yet Tapper is still instructed to pilot the new Chinook the following day. Cable discovers that part of the new Chinook's FADEC system, the digital electronic control units, had been replaced twice in the week before the crash because of engine startup problems. These control units, or DECUs, regulate the fuel supply to each of the Chinook's 2 engines to maintain safe flight.
The reason for being particularly interested in these was that they each contained memory which potentially would give an indication of the power that was set on each engine at the point of impact.
During his investigation of the crash site, Tony Cable found these control units.
One was in quite good condition, a bit of impact damage, but no fire damage. The other one was severely fire damaged, with the circuit boards really toasted.
Cable sends the engine control unit to the manufacturers, Textron Lycoming, for analysis.
There were some error codes found in the number 2 DECU memories. Unfortunately, there is no record on the memory of when a particular error code occurred. So at the end of the day, it was not possible to say whether any of them had occurred on the final flight.
The error code, a so-called E5 error, is dismissed by the manufacturers as normal. In fact, unknown to Cable, this error had been seen before. In 1989, the RAF were testing the then new FADEC engine control system at Boeing's plant in Wilmington, Delaware, when an accident occurred. The Chinook was badly damaged. Engine software expert Malcolm Perks was called in by the MOD to investigate.
What had happened was that the rotor systems on the Chinook had run up in an uncontrolled manner to some very high speed before it was caught and shut down.
Too much fuel had been supplied to one of the engines, leading to uncontrolled lift. A software fault in the FADEC system, producing an E5 error code, is subsequently blamed for the Wilmington accident.
I thought that was strange. Here we were, several years after the Wilmington accident, with same fault code. Codes occurring that had occurred then, and apparently no fix had been introduced to do anything about them.
Change axis, back 6 and right.
Robert Burke experienced such an engine run-up on 2 occasions.
If you're flying along just beneath the cloud, indeed as ZD576 was doing, it could put you into cloud effectively instantaneously.
If this happened while flying on visual flight rules, it would be easy to lose track of your location.
Scottish Military, good afternoon. This is Foxtrot 4, Juliet 40.
In this alternative scenario, the Chinook is approaching the Mull when the pilots spot heavy cloud ahead.
Looks a bit murky up ahead, cut the corner.
23 seconds to disaster. A crew member selects the waypoint change.
Selecting Corin, turn port about 15 degrees.
15 degrees port, aye.
The navigational computer instructs the pilot to turn left. Suddenly, there's a FADEC malfunction. One of the Chinook's engines overruns.
Got to run away up and rotor overspeed. Bloody hell!
With the rotors spinning out of sync, the Chinook starts to shake violently. Against the wishes of the pilots, the aircraft starts to climb, pulling it into heavy cloud.
No visibility! I'm raising the lever to contain the NR.
The crew struggle to get the aircraft under control. The aircraft's engine run-up means it's climbing. But at an insufficient rate to avoid the hillside.
Pull up, pull up!
And in cloud, under visual flight rules, the crew are no longer sure of their position.
Oh, Lord. Pull up, Rick, pull up! Pull up! Pull up! Give it down!
The RAF believes the crew were in control of the aircraft from the waypoint change to the crash. This FADEC fault scenario suggests they may not have been.
It may be that FADEC could not have caused the Mull of Kintyre crash, but it could have been a contributory factor to the situation that the pilots found themselves in that day. We'll never know.
But a FADEC fault is not the only possible mechanical failure scenario. Tony Cable believes a physical jam within the pilot's flight controls could also be to blame. He retrieves what's called the flight control closet from the crash site, a small, cramped, boxed unit that sits behind the pilot. Rods and cabling from the pilot's controls run through here to the rotors. On examining the aircraft's service record, Cable discovers that 3 weeks before the accident, components had come loose in this control closet.
The actual detachment of the bracket itself was not a huge deal, but it was a very tightly confined area, and it appeared quite likely that this could possibly jam one or more controls, so the pilots would be unable to move that particular control. Not a good situation on a flight control system.
Cable examines the recovered flight control closet.
A number of these components, quite a lot of them, had detached from the panel.
But yet again, the evidence is not conclusive.
There seemed to be no way to determine whether they had detached due to impact forces or might possibly have come out pre-impact and caused a flight control problem.
But the control closet evidence, when combined with other physical evidence from the crash site, suggest the controls could have jammed. Cable had assessed that the left rudder pedal had been pushed 3/4 of the way down before the crash. The RAF took this as evidence that avoidance action was being taken. But Robert Burke believes otherwise.
It's an extraordinary amount of left rudder to put in, even under extreme circumstances when you're flying at maximum speed. You would virtually never do that, unless you had a problem with the aircraft.
Rather than generating a banked curve, depressing the rudder pedal merely rotates a helicopter on its axis. It's a highly unusual maneuver to perform at speed.
This, to any pilot, any helicopter pilot, any pilot of any kind, would suggest that the aircraft was not fully under control at the time it crashed.
Burke believes Rick Cook may have used such heavy rudder as an avoidance measure because he was unable to steer the helicopter away from the Mull any other way.
I've got a control jam! Cut!
Such a situation could have come about if his cyclic, the stick, controlling forward and lateral movement, stopped working. A so-called control jam.
Cut! Turn the aircraft!
At the original inquiry, Boeing stated that this was extremely improbable. But just 3 years after the crash of Zulu Delta 576, a US pilot experienced a control jam as his Chinook dropped out of the sky.
It was flying along in the cruise at 1,000 feet above ground, and the nose went to one side, the pilot corrected, and the aircraft then started to rolled onto its side 90 degrees, in spite of all the efforts of the pilots to stop it.
Although all attempts to identify the source of the crippling control jam proved fruitless, it's evidence that they do happen.
Scottish Military, good afternoon. This is Foxtrot 4, Juliet 40.
In this third scenario, where a control jam is the cause of the crash, the crew are following their planned flight path and can see the lighthouse, their first waypoint.
Looks a bit murky up ahead. Cut the corner.
23 seconds to disaster. They request a bearing for their next waypoint.
Selecting Corin. Turn port about 15 degrees. 15 degrees port, aye.
The computer instructs them to turn left, away from the Mall. But as they attempt the turn, a problem with the controls becomes apparent.
Got a control jam! Not responding!
Unable to turn, they're heading for the cloud-covered mountain at high speed.
Quick, pull the collective!
To avoid the Mall, they need to slow the aircraft right down and turn away.
Quick, pull up!
Or climb immediately at the maximum rate to a safe height.
Quick, pull up!
But with the control stick jammed, they can't reduce their speed. Pulling the thrust control to force the chopper to ascend only results in a gradual climb. Seeing the mountain ahead, Cook attempts evasive action by pushing the left rudder pedal to get the aircraft to hover to the left. It's not enough.
In retrospect, looking back at my statement to the Board of Inquiry, I would have emphasised the aspect that the absence of finding a failure does not mean that there was no failure there.
Whether that technical malfunction is due to a FADEC problem.
Got to run away up and rotor overspeed. Bloody hell! No visibility!
Or another kind of mechanical failure.
I've got a control jam! Not responding! Quick, pull up!
Will never be known. In 2001, a House of Lords committee recommended the finding of gross negligence against the pilots be revoked, on the basis that this verdict can only be applied when there is no doubt whatsoever. 10 years later, in 2011, the Ministry of Defense ordered the gross negligence verdict set aside. The cause of the accident was officially changed to unknown.
Why did the Americans bomb Nagasaki? Brand new Seconds from Disaster investigates next Monday at 9. Stay tuned for Air Crash Investigation.